My name is Ian Soltz, and with my good friend Matthew Pipes, I run for a living the unprecedentedly successful YouTube channel named Army of Terror. I've known Matt since we were about 14. I met him playing Call of Duty, and since then I've watched his life spiral downhill, and I've been waiting for him to hit rock bottom for the last 3 years or so, and each day it just seems like it's gonna be the day, and it never is, but soon it will be, and I want it. I want this series to catch that moment. That isn't to say that my life is perfect by any stretch of the imagination, and I'm not trying to put myself on some pedestal above him, but as you will discover in this video and in the coming series, looking at his life is really, really something special. I'm making this as much for myself as I am for the mind readers and professional shrinks of this generation. For this first episode, in a broad scope, we will cover his life from his first gaming experience to the point when, spoiler alert, he drops out of high school. The next video, the one after this one, will again be quick and sort of overview style, picking up where we left off and ending at where he is now. I hope you enjoy this first episode of Tropes versus Diabetes in video games. Matthew James Pipes is... Do you want to be anonymous, or do you want to go by your internet name or by your real name?
Let's go by Jdance.
Okay, just stay anonymous.
Yeah.
Jdance is a 20-year-old man-child living with his father, currently not in education or employment or training. Some call it the neat life. What does your day usually consist of?
It's a lot more meticulously planned than people would think, especially around such important times as these, as the new World of Warcraft expansion's coming out in just a few days. Over the last few days to weeks...
I'm getting some background noise.
Over the last few weeks to days...
Is there a fan on or something?
No. Over the last few weeks to days, I've been doing research, and I've been practicing the new expansion as much as I can, that sometimes I have to sacrifice sleep for it.
So basically, you're not just playing video games at this point. You're centering your life around video games in a way that isn't just moment to moment.
Yeah.
All right. Is there anything else you'd like to get out of the...
Like several times over the last few months to accommodate. The servers come up at certain times. I have to be awake at certain times. I don't want to be tired for that experience. So... Especially over the last few days, I've been adjusting my sleep schedule to wake up at around midnight, which is quite polarizing.
Because midnight is when the expansion comes out, and you want to be at full alertness and be able to stay up for the longest from the point that the expansion comes out. Is that right?
Exactly.
Okay, so before we get into the meat of things, into the first part of the 20-part series, Tropes versus Diabetes in video games, is there anything that you'd like to say as a precedent for going forward? Is anything like standing out that you want to get out of the way? If not, it's fine. I just, do you want people to not make some certain assumption about you, something like that?
Well, I would say that don't be like me. My life is never going to be as fulfilling as really anyone else's, but it's kind of pointless for me to say that.
So, basically, you acknowledge that your life is not as meaningful as most people's lives.
It's almost anyone's life, yeah.
Almost anyone's, okay. With that out of the way, we're going to get into the beginning, the start of your life in video games. What was your first video game, and how did you come about playing it? Or just the first one you remember? There might have been some when you were...
game that I spent a large period of time playing was Halo 1 for the Xbox.
You're doing a weird voice, like not your normal voice. I just want you to treat this like a normal conversation between
I just woke
us.
up.
Okay.
That's how my voice is when I wake up.
Not to my experience, but okay, continue.
So yeah, my dad and my cousin lived with me at the time. They had purchased an Xbox, and they had just picked up Halo because it was the most hyped game at the time. And I tried it out. I never really thought from that period of time that my life would change so drastically just based off the video game. But I ended up playing it a lot. I got better than my dad within a few days despite being such a young age. I was probably the best player in the household.
And so this was something that the whole family did, like as a sort
my
of
dad
bonding
often
experience.
held giant LAN parties of up to 16 people playing at the same time.
Really? 16 people, like your age or his age?
All types of ages, kids, adults, grandparents.
Okay. But it was mainly like families coming over to play it?
Yeah, not anyone, that should be very good at the game. My cousin was pretty good though.
Well, I'm not talking about skill level. I'm just talking about like the types of people you were interacting with.
Yeah.
Okay. So Halo, how long did you play Halo for? Like, what was your first time playing Halo? How old were you, and when did you stop? When did you move on to the next big thing?
Must have been around 6 years old
When you started playing, or when you moved on?
when I started playing.
Okay, and how long did Halo last for?
Maybe 2 years. I remember when they announced Halo 2, I would dream about it. I would dream, because I knew they were remaking some of the maps from Halo 1 to be put into Halo 2, and I would just dream that even the weapons changing positions in the map was a huge deal for me, and I was excited for that.
Right. So, from an early age, it wasn't even about playing video games for the story, for the campaign, or anything like that. It was about the competition aspect of it, the multiplayer sort of stuff.
It sounds funny thinking back, but I used to sit with a pistol on the perch on Blood Gulch in Halo 1 and kill people from across the map and yell no scope.
And this was mostly local, playing against people in real life, not over the internet at this point.
For the starting, but an online service did eventually develop where you could play against other people.
How old were you when that happened, when you started doing that?
Probably 8 or 9. It was called GameSpy.
So a few years into your video gaming experience.
Yeah.
Okay. And then World of Warcraft is the sort of elephant in the room, the one that lasted the longest. How old were you when you started playing that? What led you to buy it?
It's hard for me to remember exactly because...
Well, think of it in terms of like what stage in World of Warcraft you started playing in.
At the very end of the original launch, so no expansion. I had played the trial a few times.
So right before the first expansion?
Yeah, I had never played for more than 10 days at a time because I couldn't purchase the game for myself. I was still very young and I didn't have my own computer. It was kind of... I didn't really have control of my life in the way that I do now, where I can buy things like that.
So the first expansion came out in early 2007. How old would you have been at that point?
13.
So around 12, 13 is when you first started playing World of Warcraft.
Yeah.
And between that point, between playing Halo 2, and playing World of Warcraft, was there some sort of transitional period where you started playing PC games, anything like that?
Diablo 2 was my first time transitioning to PC games for the majority of my time.
And that was all online?
Yes.
That was a transition from, Halo, which was something that started off as just a family experience or playing with neighbors.
At that point is when my parents really started to realize that this wasn't normal. This kid wasn't going outside and socializing. Instead, he was staying in his room for 12 hours a day during the summer, the time I'm supposed to be talking to my friends and having fun outside and doing all sorts of those things. I was instead just slaving away without taking a shower in my room on my computer.
Well, you don't have to exaggerate. It's not exactly slaving away. And you're just being lazy. You're just playing video games.
You're doing the same exact thing over and over, 12 hours a day. It's kind of monotonous.
The same exact thing, just to try to get certain item drops, right?
That
Valuable
and
drops.
Diablo 2 had an ecosystem, whereas there would be things that would drop, and you could sell those things on websites, like gray websites, and you could get forum gold, and that in turn would help you out.
Help
So
you
you
out
use
in
it
what
to purchase
ways?
other things.
What other things?
So even if you didn't directly get an upgrade, you could get something that wasn't an upgrade for yourself, sell it, and then buy an upgrade. So it had an ecosystem in that way.
Okay, so it was all based around Diablo 2. You weren't selling things for real world money or anything like that.
No.
And so when did you start playing Diablo?
Um, third grade.
Third grade.
I'm not
How
sure
old?
what age you are in third grade.
All right, third grade age. And you quit around when you start playing in World of Warcraft?
I quit Diablo 2 around the time that I started playing Call of Duty 4.
All right. When was that? So you went from Halo to Diablo 2 to World of Warcraft, and then back to console games, Call of Duty.
Yeah,
When did
so
that happen?
I think at that point, I started playing Call of Duty with a lot of my friends. It was a lot more social than Diablo 2 was, and it was just a lot more fun to play with people that I would go see at school the next day.
So in some ways it was an improvement on your life to play Call of Duty over these PC games,
That's
which
probably correct.
is sort of the state that you're in now.
Yeah.
But playing PC games, that is. So Call of Duty happened. How long did you sort of shy away from PC for? How long were you just doing Call of Duty stuff? Because I know it lasted a while.
It must have been 2 years.
Only 2 years, really?
2 years of specifically Modern Warfare 2.
Okay, of that game.
Yeah. I never played Call of Duty 4 very hardcore as I did Modern Warfare 2. It was kind of just mostly for fun.
Mm-hmm. Well, you say mostly for fun, so Modern Warfare 2 wasn't for fun?
Modern Warfare 2 is the period where I started looking at things competitively and tried to look at that as an outlet for myself.
So when you say
you and I had
competition...
played game battles. I had played game battles with some of my other friends.
Right, but it never got really serious, right?
No.
Right. We would play these sort of small competitions that were really just were like skirmishes or matches versus people, just as a one-off, never in like a tournament or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
So you stopped playing Call of Duty after a couple years of playing Modern Warfare 2 semi-competitively at an above-average level, and certainly playing it for more than most people do. How many hours a day would you say that you played Call of Duty?
I was in school at that point, so weekdays would probably be like 8 hours when I get home to when I go to bed. And
8 hours on weekdays?
The weekends probably more like 12 to 16.
So what about your homework in that time?
There wasn't. I didn't do it.
You let Call of Duty be your life at that point.
Yes.
All right. And before Call of Duty, with Diablo, were you slacking in school then?
I was passing, but I wasn't anywhere near the potential of what I think I could have been doing.
When you say what you think you could have been doing, are you basing that off of just how you view your personality or previous achievements in school?
Probably based on previous success in earlier grades of elementary school.
So you said you started playing Diablo when you were in third grade, so kindergarten through third grade you did pretty well in school. You were looking like sort of a bright kid, you'd say?
Yeah.
And then once you started really getting into online gaming, it just went downhill.
It just lost its importance.
And that's only because of the time that you put into it, or because of the sort of ethic that you brought into the classroom as well?
It was my life. Education was all that I really cared about for a long period of time. I would get home and just read books and try to learn as much as I could.
And then around third grade or so, when you made the transition, did you not care about education at all? Or was it still there, just to a lesser extent?
It was to a lesser extent.
Okay.
My grades didn't really take a steep drop off until middle school.
All right.
My behavior
And
in school
in
did
middle
change
school, what
though.
happened then?
My first quarter of middle school went decent. I had like a I passed all my classes with an A or a B.
That's pretty
Um,
good.
Still, I don't regard that as good. I regard that as pretty
Yeah.
awful.
Well, come on. I don't think that
For
you really
sixth
regard A's and B's as awful.
for sixth grade, should be all A's with a shadow of a doubt.
Without a shadow of a doubt.
What was the question?
Just sort of generally how you viewed school at that time.
I started to dislike it a lot.
So you started to dislike it a lot. Was that while you were at school, you just wanted to be home, or when you were at home, you just didn't want to go to school, or both?
Both. I would do everything in my power to either fake sick or try to skip school without consequence.
And how much of that was the learning aspect of school versus the social aspect?
The social aspect was fine. I had a lot of friends. Mostly it was just being, yeah, just like postured in a classroom for 8 hours.
Right. You just felt like it was a waste of time because, that time could be spent grinding out Call of Duty or Diablo 2 or whatever.
Exactly.
Right. So you said that your social life at school was fine. Did your friends play video games with you?
Yeah, almost everyone did.
So it was sort of a group that was centered around playing video games together online, right?
And at that time, I was playing basketball with them as well.
Basketball until what year?
8th grade.
Until 8th grade. So it went on, when did you start that?
Started playing basketball in 3rd grade.
Wow. So, with the same people, I guess, from 6th through 8th grade?
For the most part, yeah.
So you had some pretty good friendships going that had been developing for a while.
Mm-hmm.
Do you still have those friendships?
I'm still, acquainted with them. There's a few that I could still talk to as pretty good friends, but for the most part, the majority of them I've lost contact with for several years now.
And the ones who you still regard as good friends, you don't talk to them very often at all, do you?
No.
And that's sort of been a slow taper off over the last few years, at least.
Yeah, probably since I moved from where I was living to a different part of Minnesota.
But even when you lived where I'm going to censor that out, by the way, you're remaining anonymous, Jdance. Even when you lived where you were, you wouldn't really go out that much with them, right? Because you said your time was pretty much all spent playing video games.
But we had LAN parties. We all had these weekends where we'd bring all of our Xboxes and all of our systems over to one person's house and play, for a long periods of time.
Okay, how often did that happen? Once a month or so? What?
Yeah, probably every weekend I would be at someone's house playing Xbox.
Oh, really?
But every, maybe month or two, we'd have this big get-together with a whole bunch of people.
And then when you moved away, I guess you played with each other online, but to a lesser extent, just sort of tapered off.
When I moved, it was even the time where I transitioned to WoW, so the communication was even less because of that fact.
So you started playing less Call of Duty and more of this game that none of them really played, or just a couple of them played.
Mm-hmm.
And what made you get back into World of Warcraft after the Call of Duty string?
I guess after a couple of years, the game had grown stale for a lot of people. There wasn't as many people playing it every single day as there had been before, so the social aspect of it was tapering off. And besides from that, WoW had just hit its stride. It had just hit, I believe, 11 million subscribers. Most people regard Wrath of the Lich King as the most successful expansion. So the game at that point was just fun and good to play. Or I guess not good to play, but it was just fun to play.
And between your starting playing World of Warcraft and that sort of boom in that Burning Crusade expansion, Were you active at that time in World of Warcraft to a small extent while you were playing Call of Duty mostly?
I guess looking. So let me think about that.
Take your time.
Because I had played World of Warcraft, for a few stints here and there, like maybe 3 weeks at a time.
So you would sort of go on binges and then cut off. How often would those happen?
Once every few months.
So, like a fourth of the time you were playing World of Warcraft?
Yeah.
And then 3/4 you were playing Call of Duty?
Probably like a fifth.
A fifth of the time you were playing World of Warcraft? Okay. And when that happened, you would sort of cut out everything else, including Call of Duty, socializing, going to those LAN parties, all of that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then you get back into World of Warcraft with this second expansion, Wrath of the Lich King, after the first, which is Burning Crusade. At that point, what were your plans in World of Warcraft? Did you know that it was going to become this thing that you were going to get really vested in, that you were going to spend the next several years playing? Is that how it felt at the time, or was it just another game?
I think I probably knew at the time it was a possibility. I have a pretty all-in personality.
Did it ever feel like that for Call of Duty, or was there never that sort of end game?
It was there for Call of Duty.
It was there? In what ways? Like, what did you see yourself doing in 4 years? Doing the same sort of stuff in Call of Duty, or joining a professional team?
At the time, I had sort of hoped that esports as a whole would take off for Call of Duty and games like Call of Duty, but that still really hasn't happened.
Right. Not to the point where you can make a living playing
Yes.
it. Right. If that had happened, do you think that you would have taken it more seriously and possibly even been on a professional team at this point?
It's hard to tell. Probably not.
But if you had the skill?
If I had the skill, I would definitely push for it. I think I probably would have the skill.
Okay. Back to World of Warcraft. How did that go? Did you play with friends that you had in real life? Was it?
There were two of them in particular that played WoW at the same time as me. One of them still plays, the other one's in college.
We'll call them, to retain their anonymity, Nomado, who's Brian.
In reality.
Right, and then Spencer is who?
Reality.
I thought you meant Brian in reality. Okay, so Brian, Nomado, Spencer, Reality.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And do they still play World of Warcraft?
Reality doesn't play. Namato plays probably as often as I do.
Okay. And how long did you play World of Warcraft before you knew that this was like your thing, that you were spending 8 hours a day playing it, and it wasn't just these 3-week stints?
It started pretty fast.
How fast?
Probably. It's hard to believe, or it's hard to imagine what it would have been like if I didn't have to go to school at that time. I think back in those days, I was probably more gripped to the game than I am now. Now it's kind of just I sit in the cities and I socialize with my guildmates occasionally. Back then, I was actively doing everything I could in the game, whether it be achievements or getting mounts or getting pets.
And then, for those who don't know, when you say that you're just sitting in the cities, that basically means that there's a certain amount that you can do in World of Warcraft for your character in a given week, and you just cap out on that almost instantly or really quickly, right?
The capacity in which you can cap out is dependent on the guild you're in. Back then, I was never in a good guild, so I never really capped out. Now
right.
I'm in a top, just in a good top guild. So
and so in that time, you would spend a lot of time. So you always had something that you were working towards.
Yeah.
Whereas now it just takes you a few hours and you're done for the week.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And your friends who you played with, were you keeping in touch with them? Were they good friends, or did you talk to them occasionally? What was that like?
Again, that was after I moved, so communication sort of just naturally tapered off. Compounded with the fact that I didn't actually play on Xbox anymore, so I never really had the chance to talk to them.
But those two, I'm talking about the two people who played World of Warcraft.
Oh, I think at that point we probably became better friends than we had ever been.
Really?
Because we had we did things in game together, and it's something we worked toward as a group.
Okay, so you were in the same guild, the three of you?
Yeah.
And how long did that last?
Probably for 3 years, 3 or 4 years.
3 years. 3 years, basically from the start of your playing World of Warcraft, you were playing with your friends, and the same friends who you played Call of Duty with, or who you knew in real life.
And at the end of those 3 to 4 years, I had also met another friend of mine.
Well, let's stay in those 3 to 4 years, because those are sort of the crucial years in your development. That's when you really cemented your feet in World of Warcraft. At that time, leading up to that point, you were doing sort of badly in school. You just didn't want to be there. And then with a game like World of Warcraft, which is so grind dependent, you have to actually put in so many hours to play. I can assume that feeling only escalated.
Yeah.
And so did your grades suffer even more at that point?
Yeah, my grades, starting from even when I was finishing playing Call of Duty, I was mostly, in the D's or F's range for almost all of my classes.
Oh, really? So Call of Duty, not even getting into World of Warcraft, you were getting D's and F's from the A's and B's that you were getting when you started up in 6th grade?
Yeah. By the time I was in 8th grade, the last part of 8th grade, I was failing all my classes.
And so Call of Duty is sort of the opposite of a game that you need to put in a lot of time to. So your grades failed just because you didn't want to do the work, right? Not because you had something else that you really needed to do in your game.
Yeah.
And what was going through your mind at that point in your life when you started to get failing grades? Did you realize what was happening?
I realized it. I didn't think about it.
You just sort of let it happen?
Yeah. I still to this day don't really retain negative feelings about the whole thing. This is probably why I haven't changed the way that I am, but I still don't feel like I really screwed myself over that much, because I'll find a way to do whatever I want to do in life regardless. It's probably a terrible thing to think, but...
Well, at the beginning of the interview, you said something to the extent of, I recognize that my life is inferior to everyone else's, but now you're saying, even though that's the case, I'm content doing what I'm doing?
Yeah.
So you don't have any plans to change? You don't want to be doing something else?
I think that if I did have the desire to do something else, I wouldn't be in this situation.
Okay. So if you all of a sudden wanted to be a lawyer, you think that you would take steps in your life to do that?
Yeah, but I don't want to be anything else. I just sort of want to do this. And I don't know why that is.
Do you have any other desire, like a desire to move out of your dad's house or anything like that?
It comes in phases, but I don't have a feasible way of doing it.
Getting a job?
A job at minimum wage is not enough to move out on my own without a roommate or a couple of roommates.
And that wouldn't be acceptable to you?
What do you mean?
You wouldn't even consider living with a roommate?
I'd live with a roommate. I just would rather not hold a job. I'd rather play video games.
Mm-hmm.
When you compare the two, one is clearly favored.
So, when you started to fail in school, did you have conversations with your parents or teachers? Were there people who tried to set you back on the right track?
And around that time, my parents had started going through a divorce, so communication with them was kind of weird at that point. My dad tried to set me up with a counselor in the school, but they would give me the note to go down there at a certain time, and I would just not go.
Because you didn't want help. And then there was no follow-up on that. They didn't make you go down there.
They didn't make me go down there, no.
And, well, just generally, did you get talks from teachers, anything like that? Did anyone just tell you, you really have to put your life on track? You can't keep doing this?
No, not really.
That whole time, when did you start to get failing grades? And how long did it last?
Probably started in 7th grade, but the easier classes I was still passing because the homework was minuscule and time requirement. Basically, the longer the requirement of time was outside of school, the worse I did in the class.
Okay. So you still held some interest in the classroom. You still, did classwork. You weren't just sleeping in class all day.
No, depends on the class. Some classes are just extremely easy and you can pass the test without even having knowledge of the class. Some you actually, such as, government or any of the politics classes, you actually have to have information about the class. You actually have to know. You have to study. Whereas a class like, there's classes like keyboarding or there's classes like basic computer stuff that I could pass based on proximity to that information that I already had.
Okay, so what would you say is a good ratio of classes you were passing to classes you were failing or getting near failing grades in?
60-40 passing in 7th or 8th grade.
So really, you were doing bad, but you weren't doing, held back bad, right? I'm not sure exactly how the system works over there, but failing 40% of your classes, would you have gotten held back if you continued with that?
No, you can't get held back in middle school.
But moving on to high school.
I was in high school for 1 year before I dropped out.
Right, and in that 1 year, you were you threatened of being held back, anything like that?
No. The most that I remember is they told me I'd have to take the class again next year.
Okay. So you were in high school for all of 9th grade, and then you switched to online school for 10th grade, and then ended up dropping out of that. Is that right?
Yeah.
And leading up to your dropping out, what was happening at home? What was happening in your mind? What led up to that decision?
I had just moved to a different part of where I had lived, 60 miles away, I think. Yeah, 60 miles away. And I was in a new school. I didn't really have any friends there at all, whereas I did have friends that I would socialize with daily at my old high school. So it was just uncomfortable being there.
All right, so basically the social aspect that you were able to have at your middle school just dropped out at high school. Pardon the pun, but because you didn't have friends that you knew, and you didn't want to make new friends, or you didn't think that you could make new friends, you just sort of gave up on the whole thing, academic and otherwise?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, we will get into why that is on the second part of Tropes versus Diabetes in video games.